we have this lovely heart with a bouquet of flowers on it that we're going to paint today. We'll use texture and wet on wet, and you'll learn those techniques in this video. Let's get started on this heart right here. First, we're going to work on these flowers. I'm going to use Patea, which is this kind of cherry red color, and I'm going to go around some of the edges of these petals, and then I will let those set up and come back in and diffuse them. So I'll clear that brush off over here on my paper towels. I have this water brush, and you can see this technique as I take that wet clear brush and sort of loosen up some of that red there. And I'd really like to lighten up these petals a little bit more. So it takes a little bit of practice on each particular color. Is going to have a little more pigment than another in your box. So you can always test that out on a strip of paper. And all of these petals, if you're following along with this take and paint, they're very loose, so you may end up creating leaves instead of petals, and it really doesn't matter. There's like a flower right here, so I'm going to go around that. And again, clear my brush off and just come in while it's still wet and sort of dissipate some of that pigment there. And you can decide how dark or light you'd like that to be. And you can always go in and make it a little bit darker again if you want to go over that. Let's see. And I'm using this straight out of the box. It does make it easier if you have a color right out of your box than having to use a mixed color. Sometimes it's hard to get quite that intensity. So you'll have to play around with that and see what color you can get out of here. And like I said, you can kind of come in, and I'll do it on the next round. So I'm doing the same thing as I did before, kind of loosening up that pigment there. Another thing I can do is I can take water, maybe a little bit of that pigment, and kind of come in here and put water over that flower. And now I can come in and sort of pop in some paint, and it's going to start to already blend on its own, but you won't get as much of the pigment kind of pulling neatly along the lines that I've drawn here, or if you're drawing your own at home, it would still apply. And you can still kind of push that paint around a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do is continue to do this, and you can just watch the example as I go through and kind of speed up this video, because I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm sort of looking at my reference and picking some lines to go around. We really want it to be nice and kind of concentrated toward what might be the middle of the flower. And this is a leaf. Okay, so now we've kind of finished the basics of our flower. Now I'm going to just add in a couple more details here to sort of define some of those lines that might help it have keep a little bit more dimension and texture and depth in here. And then we'll let that dry for a little bit. And so the next thing I'm going to do is work on my heart over here. I am going to work along this paint while it's wet. So I don't want to go all the way around the border here, or see how it'll start to make lines. That pigment will just find its way to its own end, and then it will settle. And I'm not too worried about that getting close to the flowers because it is actually the same color, just with more water in it. So it's the Patea in this tropical set. I'm just I'm going over that line right there. And I want it to be kind of light, so you can even come in here and do a wet on wet, get an ombre look. It's kind of starting to happen here. And you can see where my brush stroke went. I'm really trying to push those minerals out toward the edge. You can also do the same thing I did over here and do a dark line along this edge at first, but you don't want to go all the way around because it'll dry and you'll end up with like a little boundary line over there. But if you want a little more interest, you can do like what I just did, which is just to add a little bit more pigment into this water here. And carefully with the end of my brush, kind of going around some of these areas that will be the leaves, and then the heart kind of disappears behind the bouquet here. And I have some areas here I'm going to just tap in a little bit more paint. See how that's going to dry up a little bit. And here there's a boundary, so I'm going to push that around. What I mean by that is that pigment is starting to form its own line. As long as it's kind of nuanced, I'm fine with it, but I don't really want any kind of brush strokes to show in this style right here. So I'll have to wait for that to dry, and I'll move on to some of the leaves around the outside. I've mixed up in this one palm and tiki to get some nice greens in here. And I might do 2 brush strokes just to leave a little bit of the white of the paper if it's a big enough leaf. And as long as that petal is dry, I'm going to come along here, and this leaf is behind that flower, so I want to make sure not to get any green paint on top of my red. And move around here and just put that green. I can always go back in and add another layer. So I like to leave white of the paper in my leaves if I can. You can also put a layer of sort of a pineapple or coconut yellow underneath and then add your green on top. This is a flower here. It's got a stem, and that actually is a petal, so I forgot that, and I'll go back in and paint that. I'm going to clear my brush and get that petal in there. It's easier to see this little flower here with that painted. And I suppose this needs to also be filled in right there. Okay, back to green. I cleared off my brush, and I'm leaving some of these to paint as flowers. So I'm getting the very tip of my brush into that kind of point at the top of the leaf just to make sure it's nice and small. and not using a fat part of my brush. So hopefully you've got a little fine tip stiff brush, either mine that I sell or one you have at home, whether it's a water brush or not. Let's see, that's the little stem to that flower. And now, while we're still waiting on, we still have a few more green places down here, so I'll mix up some more paint. In case you're not sure you can make enough of one color, you may want to move around your painting a little bit. Usually I do that, where you do a few leaves here, a few leaves there and there. That way if you run out of color, it's not like one side has a completely different color or hue than another. So let's say this is kind of a popping green. I'll come back in over here and add some of that shade of green in a few places so that it looks more cohesive. And only do that if that background is dry. Looks like it is, so I'm going to go ahead and paint this leaf here, leaving a little bit of white. And this is a green leaf also. Put a little bit of brown on that edge. And then paint that just so it kind of separates. And I want to go way out to the line so that it looks like it's in front of that heart and behind that flower. Be really careful you get that behind that petal. Okay, we may have some more leaves emerge, but I am going to now use this reef color, which is like a purple, sort of making it a lavender. And I may want to leave a little bit of the white of the paper here. We'll see. Also, straight out of the box, it has a little more pop. It's a very intense color, so you want to make sure you try it out before you put it to your paper. If that's too dark, I can always press down with a clean paper towel and take some of the pigment away. And over here, I want to add more, because I want it to be more purple than lavender. And we'll get this little flower here. If you aren't sure how you want to do your arrangement, I suggest you use a piece of paper and put your colors together. I tried this one out a few times, tried a couple iterations. Although I liked them, I ended up with this one after trial and error. So, as a matter of fact, I didn't paint this yet, so I'm glad how it's turning out. But if you wanted more contrast, then you could make sure you like the colors you're doing and how they look together. We're getting close to being finished. I just want to take a little bit of this yellow, you don't have to do this, and kind of pop it into the center here just to kind of add a little bit of dimension in there. And I may do the same thing on, even though you can't see it too much. That's what's nice about leaving a little bit of the white of the paper. You can kind of pop that into there. And now you have a heart with a bouquet of flowers.